Hey everybody, and welcome to the next chapter, selecting subsets of data from DataFrames with iloc. So the iloc indexer is completely analogous to loc, except that the only difference is that it selects by integer location. So we're going to talk a lot about integer location here. iloc can select rows, columns, or rows and columns simultaneously, just like loc. So let's take a look at what a selection will look like with iloc. So it's going to look exactly like loc. It'll be df.iloc with followed by the brackets and then the row and column selection separated by a comma. So this is what it's typically going to look like. Let's go ahead and read in our data here. And then in the next section, we will actually make our first selection with iloc. So let's go ahead and do what we did with loc and create a separate variable for the, to contain the selection. So here we'll just select a couple of rows with integer location 2 and 4, and then we'll select the first and last column. So this will be integer location 0 and -1. Okay, so before we actually make the selection, let's make sure we understand what exactly is integer location. So integer location is simply the integer where each row is located or where each column is located. So these always begin at 0 and count up from there by 1. So Jane would be 0, this row would be 1, next row would be 2, and so forth. Now, pandas also gives you the ability to reference each row or column by their label. So loc is for labels, iloc is for integer location, and you should be able to remember that because iloc, is integer location abbreviated. So iloc stands for integer location. All right, so let's go ahead and make the selection. So let's do df.iloc, then a pair of brackets, then the rows, comma, the calls. So we're going to select 2 rows and 2 columns here. And we get returned this data frame. So this is a very simple selection, and that's how iloc works. Everything has to be an integer. That's the only thing that it works with. So everything, every item in this list for rows and columns must be an integer. And it does know how to handle negative indices. It just starts from the back or from the bottom, depending on if you're selecting rows or columns. All right, let's see a few more examples of iloc. Before we see that, there are 3 different possibilities for the selection. So you can either use a single integer, a list of integers, or a slice with integers. So very analogous to loc here. So we're going to cover all 3 of these. So let's see here. It says let's slice the rows and then use a list for the columns. So let's go ahead and use, let's say we want to select again the first and last columns. And we want to select, let's use slice notation to say we want to select the first 3 rows and then the first and last column. So, and we can verify this by actually looking at the data here. And it looks like, yes, we have in fact selected the first 3 rows and then the first and last columns. Yeah, so that's a slice notation, and then this is a list. Let's move on. So let's select some rows and all of the columns. Okay. So we can do this. So to select all of the columns, you can just use slice notation with just a colon. So that's a, that's like an empty slice, and it's able to, it returns all of the columns. And this again will just return the first 3 rows, and maybe we can make this just a little bit different. We'll go from 2 to 5. So we'll get rows 2, 3, and 4. So iloc is different in the sense that from loc, it is exclusive of the very last of the stop. So this will give you back 2, 3, and 4 not a row with integer location 5. Okay, now the column selection is optional. So if you only want to select rows, you can get away with doing this, and it'll give you the exact same data frame. And the reason is the same for why you might want to keep the colon is because it reinforces the fact that you have rows and columns being simultaneously selected. It just happens to be that, you know, in this selection we're selecting all of the columns. So either way is fine, but I prefer doing this when first getting started, so it helps you know that rows come first and then columns. All right, let's see a different example. Let's select some rows in a single column. Okay, let's do that again. So let's do iloc, and let's say select row 5, then 2, and then 3, and then it says to select a single column. So let's select column 4 like this. So this time I chose not to use a separate variable for the list of rows. You can put it in here like this. That's perfectly fine. You might find it more readable to place it outside in a separate variable like I have been doing. So since we're returning a single column, and it probably helps to actually see the data here, so you can see how it got mapped out. So, you know, Christina is 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 2, and then 3, and then row 4, 0, or column 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, the height column. So that's what it has returned right there. And it returns it as a series because we have given it a single column. Now, if you'd rather a data frame be returned, well, there's a little trick, and you can just use a single item list instead of just the integer itself. So pandas will return the result as a data frame, even if you're just looking at one column, as long as you're using a list and not just a single integer. Okay, so let's this is one of the last examples. Let's select a single row as a series. So this is a little different. Let's pull up our data here. So let's just select let's say the row for Nico, which is integer location 1. So we can do this. We can say get 1, row 1, and get all of the columns. So this is confusing because the data is horizontal, but the result is vertical. But pandas just simply, it returns a one row data frame as a series. So the old column names are now in the index, and the values remain the same. They're in one single, series of data here. All right, now it's not necessary to use the columns again, so you can write it like this. Now I think it's probably a little bit easier to understand what's going on if you actually force it to be a data frame. So just like we forced the column to be the single column selection above to be a data frame, we can force this single row selection to be a data frame as well. So this preserves the index in the column, so we have a data frame, and this is sort of makes more sense. It's horizontal. We're just kind of ripping out that single row from the data frame and displaying it right here. Okay, so that's all I have for iloc. It is integer location. Again, the summary is that it is analogous to loc, but it only uses integer location. The selections can be either a single integer, a list of integers, or a slice of integers. And those selections will work for either rows or columns. All right, so this finishes our lesson on iloc. And if you want to learn more, check out the book, Master Data Analysis with Python. So this has a lot more detail. It has 600 pages, 300 exercises, multiple projects, and detailed solutions. All right, so I will see you guys in the very next video.